Now, last week we left off, we had finished up with our resentment list and the solution to resentments, which brings us to the second part of the fourth step, which we find on page 67 in our big book. It's the second full paragraph, beginning right about the middle of the page. Now, the whole second part of the fourth step is contained in this one paragraph. And as we will see, there are 5 questions here which need to be answered. Now, let's see what it says, and let's take the words literally, because that's the way they're meant to be taken. Referring to our list again, that means referring to our resentment list, the people on our resentment list. Referring to the names, the people on our resentment list again, putting out of our minds the wrongs others had done. Please understand that this means precisely what it says, that we are not engaging here in comparative fault. Modern thought is that there's some kind of a turnaround or something that we do here, but actually it's just the opposite. We have now completed our solution to our resentments, or very nearly so, and now we're going back and now we're going to look at ourselves. And we put out of our minds the wrongs others have done. We're not comparing their fault with ours or ours with theirs. The theory there somehow is, I suppose, that if we were to do that, we would come out with some kind of a balance of zero, where we would then have to say to ourselves, well, I really shouldn't resent him or her. Well, shouldn't doesn't mean anything, because the resentment's either there or it isn't. We're not going to talk ourselves out of it. The big book says we can't wish them away any more than alcohol, which is true. So we resolutely look now for our own mistakes. Where had we been selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened? Now, the way it works in practice is this. Let's take one example. Let's say we've taken Father. Father is on our resentment list, and now we take his name from the resentment list, and now we've got a whole brand new list of our own faults. Let's answer these 4 questions. With respect to Father and my relationship with Father, where had I been selfish? Now, please notice that the word is where, not was I. This requires a narrative answer. In what way was I selfish in my relationship with my Father? Write down my actions, attitudes, and motivations. See what was selfish. I need to make that selfishness stand out clearly. Second question, in my relationship with Father, where was I dishonest? In all of the instances of dishonesty, and it may very well be that there are multiple examples of the same type of dishonesty, so obviously we're not going to parade the horribles, but we will want to give a couple of examples of this type. Let's say that we constantly lied to him about what we were doing or who we were with, or whether lied to him about money or any kinds of things. We may have done that multiple times, and we don't have to write about each time, obviously. But it's a narrative description of our dishonesty with our Father. The third question, in my relationship with Father, where had I been self-seeking? Now, self-seeking implies or describes an action, doesn't it? In other words, self-seeking is selfishness in action. So I'm going to describe the things I did which were selfish and self-seeking. And then finally, in my relationship with my Father, where was I frightened? Now notice that fear appears in every single one of our parts of the fourth step. because fear is the progenitor. Fear is the force behind our defects. Fear it is which warps and perverts our natural instincts. And it is out of this warping and perversion of natural instincts that all of our defects arise. So now we've had 4 questions answered in a narrative form. And though a situation had not been entirely our fault, we tried to disregard the other person involved entirely. In other words, guys, there isn't any this stuff of saying, well, no wonder you did that to Father. Look what he did to you. Why, heck, if that had happened to any one of us, we would have retaliated in some way. We'd have acted up, or it would have twisted our little minds, and we would have done these things. You can't blame yourself here. Look what he did to you. We love that. Big Book said, no. We're not looking for excuses here. We're not looking for rationalizations here. We're not looking for self-delusion here. We're looking for the truth. What is your present reality? Are you afflicted with dishonesty or are you not? Because the past is going to tell us that. And so we disregard the other person involved entirely. Now the 5th question is this one. Where were we to blame? Now this question requires of us again a narrative answer. We need to look to see where the fault was ours. Where were we to blame? Now you see, in the process of doing this, we've identified the wrongs and the harm that we've done to Father. We're not worried here. We're not considering the harm he might have done to us. Why? Because we've already forgiven that. We have prayed for that. We have to be set free from that. We cannot go on harboring those resentments any longer. They're killers. They shut us off from the sunlight of the Spirit. They're infinitely grave, the Big Book says. So irrespective of what Father may have done, whether he deserves it or not, or whether we're justified or not, forget all that stuff. Got to, because we're dealing here with life and death. We're not doing some kind of comparative stuff here to see who's more at fault than others. That's deadly. We need to be set free from our resentments. We need also to be set free from our guilt. And where we have done things that harmed Father, regardless of what he may have done to us, we still carry guilt. And in our 9th step, we're going to be set free from that guilt, because we're going to make amends to Father, even though he may have done much more harm to us than we did to him, because that's irrelevant. This all comes back to this one thing. You've got to always remember why we're here and what's going on here. We're doing this in order to fit ourselves to be of maximum service to God and the people about us. That's why we're here. We're not here because we're supposed to go out and make a fortune or set everything straight in our lives or make everybody else in the world happy. We're here because God has a mission for us, a purpose. And for us to be able to fulfill that purpose, we have to be set free from the things which block us off from him. And we do that by working these steps. Where were we to blame? The inventory was ours, not the other man's. Again, separating us from them. Please, whenever you see that duality, reject it. It's not Big Book. It's not the 12 steps. It's somebody's cockamamie idea of the 12 steps. Maybe to make it easier. I'm not sure where that stuff all came from. But it's not, and most of the time they claim they're taking right out of the Big Book. That's balderdash. They're not. So we stay away from that. We want to know how to work the 4 steps. We go right here to the book and it tells us. Here are the questions. We answer them. Remember that there's no such thing as filling in blanks here, or putting check marks, or writing real small in little dinky spaces. This is a narrative, and take as long as necessary, write as much as necessary in order to do a thorough job. It's your life. And nobody can do this for you. You have to do it for yourself. And there is no easier, softer way, and there are no shortcuts. And every time anybody offers us a shortcut, we have to ask them, where's that in the big book? Where's God in that equation? We just put it aside and we go back to the book and we do the work that the book directs us to do, just as it directs us to do. Why? It's simple, guys. It's so simple. The people who wrote this book are telling us this is what we did to recover. Exactly what we did. The word they use is precisely. And we truly believe that if you follow exactly, precisely in our footsteps, you too will recover. And they're right. Millions of people have already proven that. Why would we want to do anything differently? I don't understand. Why would we take a chance with our lives, with our spirit, with our soul? Yes. Jim, speak up so I can hear you.
I just have a question. I'd like to know if the biggest resentment in my life was me.
If what?
Is me. Is my failures.
You're resentful of yourself?
If so, how do you go about working that out?
That's a very interesting question, and it's something which is always bandied about these days. Stop and think about it logically. Are you two people?
No.
Well, how can you resent yourself then?
For not being the person that I should have been, but being...
Look, you can be real unhappy about the things you've done. You can be very unhappy about the things you do. But you can neither resent yourself any more than you can love yourself. You can love the things you do. You can love the things you see about yourself. But those are outside of you. Unless you are a multiple personality, a resentment has to have an object. You can't be the object and the resenter at the same time, can you? See, it's physical impossibility, and it's one of those traps, those intellectual traps we fall into. If you think it through, there are things about yourself you see you don't like. There are things you've done that you don't like, you know are wrong. Well, just admit it. You can hide that under I'm resentful of myself. That's balderdash. Got it?
Got it.
Okay. Now then, when we saw our faults, we listed them and we placed them before us in black and white. Now then, here's this next sentence. You got to understand what this sentence is saying to you. We admitted our wrongs honestly and were willing to set these matters straight. That's pure 8th step. Made a list of all the people we've harmed, became willing to make amends to them all, right? So it starts right back here in the 4th step. We admitted our wrongs honestly and were willing to set these matters straight. Setting these matters straight is pure 9th step. That's what we do when we make amends. So now that's the second part of our 4th step. And notice that we have identified 3 of the 4 cardinal defects: dishonesty, selfishness, and fear. We've identified people we've harmed through our conduct. We've become willing to set these matters straight, and we've admitted our wrongs honestly. So you see how that works and how critical it is that this part of the 4th step not be polluted by some kind of meshing together with other parts of the 4th step. And because we have read this together carefully, I think all of us can see now how each of these parts stands alone. And each part is here for a specific purpose. The second part of the 4th step, which begins at the bottom of page 67, is our fears list. This is the third part of the 4th step, and it stands alone. It is a separate list of fears, even though we have already looked at a lot of our fears in the first 2 parts. Now we're going to categorize them specifically And moreover, we're going to find out as best we can where they come from. Now, it's important for us to understand this business about fear. Many people say fear is the absence of faith. Well, in a very broad sense, obviously that's true, if we assume that faith is strong enough that it will cancel out the results of our feeling threatened. That is to say, if we reach a point where our faith is that strong, then we seldom, if ever, will feel fear, because knowing that God is there and trusting Him completely, it ends up that we've got nothing to fear. Well, that may be a ways down the road for most of us, and I can tell you from long experience that it does come most of the time. We get to be pretty much set free from fear. And it's a wonderful thing but it sneaks up on you, and it's not this instantaneous release from fear that we got by taking that first drink. Because of course that's exactly what booze did for us. Because booze would go right to the frontal lobes of our brain and wipe out any thoughts of danger, and fear being extremely painful. We had this wonderful release from the pain of fear. And some people claim, I think it might be true, that the most exquisite feeling in the world is a release from pain. And most of you can remember that first or second or third time of drinking when suddenly realized that your whole perspective had changed. Could be 10 feet tall and immortal and greatest dancer in the world, smartest person in the world, and the greatest driver who ever lived. And not to speak of the greatest lover. Until, of course, we reached a certain point. Then there wasn't a whole lot of loving we could do. That's the siren song of booze. The release from fear. You see? That's what it really comes down to. If I want to hide out from the problems that I've caused for myself, what am I really hiding from? I'm hiding from that enormous fear and anxiety and worry that I've caused myself through my misdeeds, through my inattention, through my procrastination, and so on. And so fear would be gone, and alcohol accomplished that. It has the same effect on our brain in many respects as ether. It dulls the frontal lobes of the brain, and that's where our censor is, the part of our brain that tells us this is wrong, you shouldn't do this, you ought to worry, this is a threat. And so by having that blocked out, we have a whole different, our whole attitude changes right there, and with some of us could happen real quick. But what is fear? Fear is a phantom, believe it or not. Fear is phantasmagorical. We're not talking here about the fear of a .357 Magnum cocked, held at our head by a maniac who is threatening just for the hell of it to kill us. We're not talking about the fear engendered by the imminent collision between our soft body and the hard body of a bus doing 40 miles an hour. We're not talking about those kinds of things that came out of the primordial ooze, came out of our jungle ancestors, the fear or the flight or fight syndrome. Because 99% of the time when we have fear, it's something our brain has manufactured. And it has no reality. Because it always refers to something that hadn't happened yet. It's out in the future there somewhere. There's no reality to it at all. So what we're really dealing with when we deal with fear is a product of our brain, of our minds. And it's axiomatic, is it not, that we cannot cure a sick mind with a sick mind? We're not going to talk ourselves out of these fears. The human solutionists, of course, are right when they tell us that if we walk through the fear, we'll find that most cases it was unwarranted, because in most cases that's true. Stop and think about it. If the fears are phantoms, they really don't have any substance, but nevertheless they're extremely painful and very, very destructive. Also, fear is very contagious. If you're living in an atmosphere of anxiety and dread and fear, or you're working in that atmosphere, it's contagious. It's like the Asian flu. And it can be a very difficult problem for us because sometimes we don't have a choice, which means that we need to have a way to be free from fear not only every day, but all through the day if necessary. Because we cannot abide living in fear. It's a killer. Remember that all of our resentments, all of our angers are products of fear. You're never going to be angry with me if I don't threaten you some way. And so, what the big book, so let's see what the big book says about this, because this is so descriptive. Bottom of page 67, the last partial paragraph, 2/3 to 3/4 of the way down the page. Notice that the word fear is bracketed alongside the difficulties with Mr. Brown, Mrs. Jones, the employer, and the wife. Make a note in your book that this is talking about the resentment list on page 65, or just say C65. And fear is there in every case where there is a resentment. Why? Because that's the truth. Resentment is fear, is anger which persists, and anger is always triggered by a feeling of threat of some kind, of fear. This short word somehow touches about every aspect of our lives. And it was Franklin Roosevelt, beginning of the Second World War for the United States, said the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. He also said, I hate war. My dog Fella hates war. My wife Eleanor hates war. And I hate my wife Eleanor. One of his fireside chats. Okay. Now here's the truth of it. This is a very colorful sentence. And then let's take a look at what it says, and then let's see how that plays out. Talking about fear now. It was an evil and corroding thread. The fabric of our existence was shot through with it. Now then, let's see if we can draw a word picture of that so that it'll be quite meaningful for us. Let's see. Suppose that your life is a tapestry, a beautiful tapestry to be hung on the wall. In ancient days they call it an arras, A-R-R-A-S. In this tapestry you would like to be woven with this story of your life that would be beautiful and colorful, and it would be coherent, and it would all hang together, and it would show you in the very best light. Unfortunately, the warp and the woof of your tapestry are fear. And so all of the beautiful colored threads that were to be woven into this beautiful picture have to be supported by, and they have to run through the fear, horizontally and vertically. And the fear is warped and perverted all of these threads, corroded these threads. And so that the picture of your life is all skewed, and it's messy, and it's the worst kind of psychedelic pop art. You can't even tell that it's a real life. You look back and it's a life so bungled and so messed up. And looking at this, we say, well, wait a second, all this happened because I was a drunk? No, no, no. All this happened because fear rules. And this isn't just you and me, you know. This isn't just us drunks. It's everybody out there. People who do not have a strong faith must, of necessity, deal all their lives with fear. And we're so fortunate because we have a program, a spiritual program, which allows us, if we do the work, to reach a place where our faith is strong enough and our trust in God is strong enough that we can literally begin to live our lives without fear. And what happens is we get to start over again with this tapestry of our lives, and we get to weave it on warp and woof, which is faith rather than fear. It doesn't matter how much longer we have to live, we get to start right from today to do that. It goes on to say this: it set in motion trains of circumstances which brought us misfortune we felt we didn't deserve. But did not we ourselves set the ball rolling? Sometimes we think fear ought to be classed with stealing. It seems to cause more trouble. Now then, as always with the big book, first it states the problem, and then it states the solution. And the first part of the solution to fear is that we're going to have to inventory them. We reviewed our fears thoroughly. We put them on paper, even though we had no resentment in connection with them. We ask ourselves why we had them. All right, let's take a look now at what are the more common fears which almost all of us have. Because this, over a long period of time, I've come to know, both from myself and from people I've worked with, pretty much what the fears are that just about everybody has. We have a fear of losing what we have. We have a fear of not getting what we want or need. We have a fear of rejection. We have a fear of failure. Fear of economic insecurity. We have fear of being found out for the things we've done. We have fear of being punished. We have fear of injury, sickness, and pain. We have fear of death. We have a fear that we can't stop drinking or drugging or whatever it is we've been doing to ruin our lives. We may have a fear of God. There are many who are afraid. One of their major fears is getting old, fat, and ugly. Growing old, having nobody there. Fear of being lonely and being left alone. Old age can be a fearsome prospect for those who retire too soon. I guarantee you that. They tried to get me to retire. I told them to stuff it. So we can take this catalog of fears and we can expand on it as to whatever we have in our particular fear chest. But we're going to write down these fears, and then we need to write down what we believe to be the cause. What is the threat? Well, pretty interesting when you look back on what caused these fears. Where did they come from? One of the pretty much classic things that we find with most people, ourselves included, is that somewhere along the line we've come to accept as a maxim that the past will repeat itself. And therefore, if we have present circumstances which remind us very strongly of something which happened in the past, where we had a very bad result, the natural result is for us to believe that somehow or another that past will repeat itself, and we therefore need to be afraid. Yeah, speak up, please.
King, you can have a feel yourself.
A fear of what?
Yourself.
Fear of yourself?
Yeah.
I don't know how you could. You might be afraid of your reactions, if that's what you mean. Because, and that's exactly what we're talking about. Let's examine this a little bit further. If we're looking at something that happened in the past, which reminds us of something that we're afraid is going to happen now, we think we had a bad result in the past, therefore we need to be afraid we'll have the same result now. However, the past has no power over our present or our future if we change our actions. Because if we don't do what we did then, we're not going to have the same result we had, and that's logical, right? And so we have the ability, because we're not powerless over our actions, we're powerless over our thinking, but we can take right action. And a big part of what we're doing here in our fourth and fifth step is we're finding out what didn't work, so we can stop doing what didn't work and start doing what will work. And when we start doing what will work, our whole life changes. So if we can identify that a big part of our fears are the result of something from our past, and if we can understand that what we really need to do is change our actions, what you're talking about, instead of being afraid that I'll react the same way, make up your mind not to act the same way, because you know what it was. You've already done your inventory, right? So that solves that problem. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Good. All right. Now then, another place that we find fear arising is out of pride. Remember that pride is the godfather of all of our defects. And fear is the hitman that pride sends forth to kill us. And so when we begin to identify the causes of our fears, one of the things that is so beautiful about this is that we learn what not to do. We learn what the mistakes of the past were, and we make up our mind not to repeat them. And we have the power to do that. We're not powerless over our actions. And powerlessness does not mean we're powerless over action. If we were, we'd never recover, would we? We have the power to take right action.